Taco Bell was within walking distance of my house. Not many people live near the mall, but the rent was cheap. Every night I went there and ordered the same thing, a burrito and a large drink. This was my excuse for dieting. I was always happy with this dish because it cost less than $3, which meant I could save more money. I've been saving all the money I can for the past 6 years. I had one goal: to buy a wife. I didn't care where she came from or what she looked like. It was important that she lived with me and shared my life. If I'm lucky, she might even like me. I never considered love as an option. I've always liked children and always wanted to have my own. This was the only requirement I planned to include when applying. The woman I ended up with must be willing and able to have children. I unwrapped the bean and beef burrito. My hands were huge, rough and rough. They were perfect for the hot, juicy delicacy that was my dinner. I worked with heavy equipment all day long, and even when I wore gloves, at the end of the day they still looked like big pieces of meat. It was my job. I loved her, and they paid me well. A boy of about 6 was sitting 2 tables away from me. His whole family was busy talking and eating Mexican delicacies, and he just took bites and looked at me. He watched as I brought this monster to my mouth and took a bite with a crunch. Soy juice ran down my chin. To him, I was charming. I wiped my chin and smiled at him. When he smiled back, I felt happy. I finished my dinner and headed for the door. The boy didn't take his eyes off me. As I walked out, I smiled again. Children liked me, but adults, especially women, seemed to find me repulsive. As I walked past the building, I looked at my reflection in the windows. It truly was an impressive sight. My height was over 180 centimeters, and my hair was cut short. If they were any shorter, I would go bald. I had a wide, flat face with a large mouth. I wasn't the guy girls dream about when they go to bed at night. I graduated from high school, but never went on a date, not even to prom. I think it was partly my fault because I never asked a girl to go out with me. I was conditioned by the rejection biases that I constantly carried within me. It was sad, but I was okay with it. In another 2 years, I will have enough money to buy something for my wife. I might get on the computer tonight and do some more shopping. Now I had enough money to find a girl in several places, but I hoped that if I spent more, I would buy a better product. It was a sad way to think about your wife, but a guy like me didn't have many options. It was only a 5-minute walk to the house. It was a small bungalow with 2 bedrooms. It didn't look too big, but it was furnished and the utilities were cheap. There was a kitchen in the house, but I never used it. I didn't even have any dishes or kitchen utensils, but I had a refrigerator with cold drinks. At night, the shops in the shopping center were empty. It was a little creepy, but cool at the same time. From time to time, as I passed by, I would scare away a cat or a lost dog. Tonight was a little different. There were 3 of them, and they seemed to be having a damn good time beating the crap out of someone on the ground. I didn't know if this guy deserved a beating or not, but I didn't like the odds. All I said when I approached them was hello. All 3 stopped and turned to me. I had the distinct feeling that I had just screwed up big time. I was big, but not cool. I always avoided fights, but looking back, I realized there weren't that many. No one bothered me just because of my height and unsightly appearance. These guys, however, were not impressed. I quickly decided that now was not the time to be the good guy. The first one didn't have a chance. I hit him with my right straight hand with a backhand. To my surprise, he just fell to the ground. The other 2 got close enough to land a few punches that didn't seem to affect me at all. I felt them, but did not feel much pain or discomfort. I backhanded thug number 2 with the same right hand, and then picked up the 3rd guy and threw him into a nearby dumpster. The poor guy who was being beaten sat and watched. He didn't look very good, but he was still attentive. I helped him to his feet and into the Mercedes parked in the middle of the alley. I've never driven a car before, but he better go to the hospital. It took about 10 minutes to find a 24-hour clinic. He didn't say a word, but simply looked at me with caressing eyes. I may have been ugly, but this guy was sloppy. His olive skin glistened with sweat and blood running down his face. One cheek seemed to be swollen, as was his lower lip. His lips were thin and tightly compressed. I stayed with him just long enough to make sure he was taken care of, and then I caught a taxi and went to my house. My first Good Samaritan experience cost me $15. 4 days later, I read in the newspaper that the bodies of 3 men had been found in the same alley. All of them were killed with one shot to the back of the head. For some reason, I didn't think it was a coincidence. Although I preferred Taco Bell for dinner, I always went to Waffle House for breakfast. I was a creature of habit and ate the same portion of pancakes and fried eggs every day. I never had to order unless a new waitress showed up. The girls used to put a piece of bacon or sausage on my plate because they knew they would get a good tip for it. It was a joke between us and one of the few real interactions I ever had with people. I once thought about asking one of them out on a date, but I chickened out. For 3 months, my life returned to normal, and then everything changed again. The weasel from the alley has returned to my life. Mr. Giselle Trent. Robert Trent. He stood on the landing with a smile on his face. I guessed that he was trying to look pleasant, but it sounded somehow ominous. Yes, most people call me Bobby. Can I come in? We need to talk for a few minutes. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a small, creepy goth girl. She was less than 1.5 meters tall and looked sickly. I stepped aside, and they both entered. He sat down on the sofa, and she stood next to him and slightly behind him. You know who I am, don't you, Bobby? Yes, you're the same guy I took to the hospital a few months ago. My name is Morris. Morris Franklin. What can I do for you, Mr. Franklin? I need help. Bobby, I need to leave the county for a few years, and I'd like you to take care of Topaz for me. What is Topaz? Morris looked over his right shoulder and nodded. This is Topaz. She is my favorite sub. I'll be in Amsterdam for about 7 years, and I can't believe I'm leaving her with someone else. You don't even know me. I've only met you once, and that was under rather unusual circumstances. I have studied you very carefully, and I feel that Topaz will be safe with you. I don't think so. While I'm gone, I'll pay you $2,000 a month for her maintenance. All I ask of you is to keep her safe. I have to work, Mr. Franklin. I can't watch her every minute. What's to stop her from just leaving when I'm not home? She obeys, Mr. Trent. She will listen to your every word. If you tell her to stay, she will stay and won't ask questions. He called me by my last name. I think this was done to emphasize what he wanted to say. You mean like a Stepford wife? Not exactly like that, but close to it. What do you mean when you say that she will obey my every word? Topaz will cook for you and clean your house. If you want, she will also share your bed. It has been programmed since childhood and cannot refuse you anything. For you, perhaps, but not for me. She will agree if I tell her. Mr. Franklin and I talked for another half hour. Topaz stood quietly all this time and did not utter a word or express any emotions. Before leaving, he stood in front of the little girl and spoke quite clearly and expressively. Mr. Giselle Trent is your new master. You will unquestioningly do everything he asks of you. Do you understand me? Yes. That was the first and only word that came out of her lips. As he left, I noticed a small bag sitting by the front door. I could only assume that she had everything she owned in this world. The only thing that caused even more regret was the girl herself. I took her bag and headed down the small hallway to the next bedroom. She followed me like a puppy follows a dog. When I showed her where the toilet was, she gave me a small smile and immediately went to the toilet. It felt like she hadn't gone to the toilet all day. I assumed that when I showed it to her, she took it as permission to use it. Mr. Franklin left me a check for $2,000, but no phone number or contact address. It looked like I was in a bind. There was no food in the house. To feed her, I had to take her with me. I ate lunch while I was at work, so she had to skip that meal. It didn't work. I had to make some adjustments. It was time for dinner, and she followed me to Taco Bell. I asked what she wanted, and she just looked at me. I got my usual, and she got 2 soft chicken tacos with a small drink. It was an interesting dinner because for the first time more people were looking at her than at me. It was easy to see why. Topaz had straight black hair with a pink stripe on the sides. The dark eyeshadow and purple lipstick gave her a very strange look. I think it would be attractive to some, but not to most. In addition to numerous ear piercings, she had silver or metal studs in her eyebrows, nose, and lower lip. One of them on the tongue was not so noticeable. Although I understood why, I was annoyed by the whispered comments made by many of the visitors. For some strange reason, I'm starting to feel a little protective of my new charge. On the way home, I tried to find out more about her. What is your name? I have a birth certificate. It says my name is Madison. Madison Hart. But I don't know this name. How long have you been working with Mr. Franklin? I'm not sure. I think 4 or 5 years. How did you meet him? I haven't met him. He bought me. I had many questions. Morris Franklin bought this young girl just as I was going to buy a wife. Suddenly, I felt as much of a scoundrel as he did. I didn't ask her any more questions. When I got home, I called my boss at work and took a week off. I had a long vacation ahead of me, and I had a lot to do. Topaz seemed extremely pleased when I told her that she could use the toilet and bathroom any time she wanted. Apparently, it was common practice to control such things. I told her she could take a shower, and she immediately started undressing in front of me. Normally, I would have turned and walked away, but in this case, it was her body that caught my attention. She had scars and bruises all over her body. Many of the scars were from cigarette or cigar burns. Her back was covered with marks from the lashes. I was confused by the whole situation. I realized it had to do with a culture I was unfamiliar with. There were more metal decorations. She wasn't my property, but she was going to be with me for 7 years. I had to make a decision, and I made it. Topaz came out of the shower and joined me in the living room. She was wearing nothing. The initial shock of the state of her body wore off, and I now realized that I was alone with a naked girl. She was young and petite and had a beautiful body despite her flaws. I quickly realized that she was naked on purpose, probably because she thought that was what I wanted. She was not ashamed of her body and seemed comfortable in my presence. I left the room and returned with a large beach towel. She seemed embarrassed when I insisted that she cover herself. Damn it, I embarrassed myself. I could have watched her all night, but for some reason I felt dirty and guilty. It was still early evening, but I needed a break. I walked her into the bedroom and closed the door. She looked disappointed, but I couldn't tell if she was afraid she had done something wrong or was unhappy because I didn't want to have sex with her. I really wanted to sleep with her, but not under the current circumstances. I was looking forward to my first morning with my new guest. If she was going to be with me for 7 years, some things needed to change. I went into the kitchen, and she stood at the table and waited. I didn't know how long she was there. We couldn't do anything in the kitchen because it was empty. I headed towards the door and Topaz immediately followed me. She followed me all the way to the Waffle House. We didn't say a word. Today, I took a separate seat rather than my usual one at the counter. Glenda worked behind the counter and brought water and coffee for both of us. She looked at me questioningly and seemed to be waiting for some kind of answer or explanation. I didn't know what to say. I'll have breakfast as usual and bring a Western omelet for the lady. Glenda made a strange grimace when I used the word lady in relation to Topaz. There were a lot of people behind the counter, and we caught the looks of employees and other customers. My breakfast was as I ordered, but there was no extra meat on the plate today. Topaz ate everything without saying a word. When we left, I left a larger tip on the table than usual. Glenda and the other girls may have felt a little awkward in the presence of my guest, but a big tip should have shown them that I understood. I didn't mind people staring at me and making quiet comments, but I didn't like it when they did the same to Topaz. On the way back home, I made my first big decision. Topaz never sat down unless she was ordered to, even in a restaurant. She never spoke unless asked or required explanation. I told her to sit at the kitchen table, and I sat down opposite her. I am your master. Is that right? Yes, master. You must do everything I tell you. This is right. Yes, master. From now on, your name will be Madison. You understand? Yes, master. My name is Madison. I didn't like this game, but I didn't know how else to do what I wanted. I didn't have any grand plans for her, but something had to be done. Now that the name problem was resolved, I offered her the first task. I slid needle nose pliers, a tube of Neosporin, and a small container of Tupperware across the table toward her. She looked at them and then at me. Madison, go to your room and take off all your clothes. I want you to remove all the metal studs and piercings you have. Every single one. Place them in a plastic container and then take a shower. Once you are clean, apply a small amount of ointment from this tube to each of the empty orifices. You don't have to do it with what's on your tongue. When you're done, get dressed and come back. Oh yeah, Madison, please, no makeup. I don't know why I added please. It was probably out of habit. I'm not a big drinker, but I had a beer while I was waiting for her. I thought I heard her make a few little ouch sounds, but I was probably wrong. She should have been more resilient than that. The beer was warm before I even finished it. Like I said, I'm not a big drinker. When she returned to the kitchen, she looked the same as before, but at the same time changed, if that makes sense. She handed me pliers and ointment. I gave her the ointment back and told her to use it if she had any sore spots. The trip to Walmart was going to be expensive, but I didn't care. We took 2 carts. At Home Goods, we bought dishes, silverware, pots and pans, a toaster, and a small microwave. In the health and beauty department, we bought everything we needed to take care of ourselves, which I thought was necessary. She helped me choose soap, toothpaste, and feminine care products without my help. It was a relief to me that she had anticipated what I wanted from her. When we walked into the hair dye section, things slowed down a bit. I asked her which package was closest to her natural color. She seemed a little confused, but eventually pointed to a box that had a photo of a girl with brown hair on it. She looked at the box and smiled before placing it in the cart. When we got to the women's department, I found an employee and asked her for help. I told the saleswoman that Madison needed 6 sports bras and a dozen pairs of cotton underwear. I wanted it to be practical rather than sexual and felt it was important to communicate my desires. We also bought socks, slacks, blouses, and a light jacket before heading to the shoe department. I planned to buy her 2 pairs, but ended up getting 3. When we headed to the produce section, the first cart was full. I was completely confused. As an ordinary man, all I could think about was steaks and hot dogs. Madison noticed my hesitation and touched my arm. Robert? I didn't expect her to speak. Yes. Do you want to buy a coffee pot? Of course, I wanted to buy a coffee pot, but I didn't think about it while I was in the appliance department. I just looked at her and nodded affirmatively. You go get the coffee pot, and I'll get the food. Wow, it was a relief. I wasn't planning on going grocery shopping. She took the empty cart and headed to the meat section while I tried to find the coffee pots. After 15 minutes, I stopped. What the hell was I doing? I left her alone and went to wander around the store. She could just leave, and I would never be able to find her again. God, I was as stupid as I looked. I grabbed the cheapest coffee maker they had and rushed back to the produce section. I couldn't see her. I walked up and down the aisles, but she was nowhere to be seen. Robert, I'm ready. Did you take the coffee pot? She was walking right behind me. The cart was half filled with groceries. She smiled, noticing that I was happy to see her. I don't think she understood why I was happy about it. The total amount for everything was more than $200. I had money, but I decided to use my credit card. I didn't have many opportunities to take advantage of them. On the way home, Madison smiled. I thought I heard her humming something to herself, but maybe I was wrong. I tend to imagine good things because it brightens my life. First, we laid out the food. I asked her to choose where she would like to place things. She was a little hesitant at first, but quickly got the hang of it. She watched me from the kitchen as I carried her new clothes into the bedroom. The packages took up most of the single bed. The bathroom had a small linen closet. I put all the new toiletries and personal items on one shelf. I also cleared out a shelf in my medicine cabinet for her. I left the box of hair dye on the sink. When I returned, she was standing in the kitchen. She didn't do anything but just stood there. This annoyed me. I didn't get too upset about a lot of things. I had to do something to stop her from being so subservient. I didn't mind having her as my companion, but I didn't want her to be a zombie. I told her to go to her bedroom and try on all the new clothes to make sure they fit her. There was an empty chest of drawers in the room and several hangers in the closet. She smiled as she walked out to open her purchases. She already knew what lay there, but it seemed she still couldn't wait to look at them again. I decided to figure out how to use the new coffee pot. I ended up with a mess on my first try, but it turned out pretty well on my second. I was enjoying my culinary skills by making coffee when Madison returned to the kitchen. She was wearing jeans, an orange t-shirt, and white tennis shoes. She was nice. She smiled when she saw me smiling. I was still drinking my wonderful brew when she skipped back into the bedroom. It may not have actually been a skip, but she had a bounce in her gait. I called the HR person at work and asked what I needed to do to get Madison included in my insurance. After 10 minutes of confused chatter, I thanked her and hung up. I didn't know what came over me, but I felt myself beginning to feel responsible for her. She hasn't been with me all day yet, but I'm already attached to her. I have matured and become vulnerable. Maybe I should slow down. Madison was busy in the bedroom. I left the house to think about my new situation. A day ago, I was a lonely, depressed loser trying to find a way to buy a wife. Today, I was responsible for the daring little sex who was forced upon me. I had no idea what I would do with her for the rest of the week, let alone for 7 years. I didn't even know if it was legal for me to keep her. It was as if she was a pet and not a person. None of my life experiences prepared me for what was happening. Damn, I was confused. I fueled up in the car and then bought 2 Subway sandwiches before heading home. I liked their sandwiches, but the bread was disgusting. I always wanted someone in the company to improve the quality of their bread. Madison seemed relieved when I returned home. I got the feeling that she was a little worried when she noticed that I had left. It didn't seem to suit her nature, or what I thought her nature should be. She was a submissive. She wasn't supposed to show any emotion. Damn, what did I know? I wasn't even sure what a submissive was, and I definitely didn't know what to do with her. For lunch, we drank 2 cans of soda and some chips. It was nice to eat at home, and it was nice to have someone to talk to, even though she barely spoke. After eating, she put the dishes away, and I sat down to watch TV. I wasn't used to having free time during the week and didn't know what to do with myself. Madison didn't seem to know what to do with herself either, so I just looked toward the back of the house and nodded. She quietly left the room. I wasn't a regular TV watcher, so I switched channels. I was surprised to see a photograph of Morris Franklin on the screen. He was wanted by the FBI and several other local and federal agencies. It turned out that Mr. Franklin was not only ugly to look at, but also a disgusting person. Most of what they were talking about was beyond me, as I didn't understand when they were discussing his involvement with the 3 dead guys they found in the alley. I thought it was funny that they didn't know where he was, but I did. Then I realized that he was probably lying to me. Because of my gullibility, it was easy to do. 10 minutes later, I was completely engrossed in a Steven Seagal film. I fell asleep before the end of the movie and woke up to the familiar smell of a bean burrito. Madison cooked dinner herself. A frozen burrito is no substitute for the real thing, but I appreciated her efforts. She served it with corn chips and Pepsi Cola. I smiled at her efforts, and she smiled back. It was easy to make her happy. What I liked was that she seemed to feel comfortable around me. I was just finishing my meal when I noticed that her hair had turned light brown instead of shiny black. She looked cute. I found myself thinking how good she would look if she were 15 centimeters taller and 20 kilograms heavier. I immediately felt guilty for not being grateful for what I had. That evening, she sat with me on the couch, and we watched tired old sitcoms. We didn't talk at all. I didn't know how to talk to her or anyone else, and she had been trained not to. What a strange couple we made. I usually went to bed early, and tonight was no exception. The only difference this evening was that, for the first time in my life, I was not sleeping alone. 10 minutes after the lights went out in all the rooms, Madison came into my room and lay down in my bed. I was scared to death for many reasons. I wasn't a virgin, but the only girls I was ever with were the ones I paid for. I lay completely still. I was afraid that if I moved or said anything, this beautiful moment would disappear. I hadn't really thought about the possibility of having sex with Madison. I'm sure at some point I would have thought about it, but I haven't yet. I guess she took my silence as an agreement to continue. Over the next hour, I experienced the joy of free, liberated sex. I didn't do anything at all, but I enjoyed it. Madison was skilled and understood things that I could never have imagined. All the impossible things I saw on the internet happened in my bed. It was all over too quickly. When I woke up in the morning, she was curled up with her head on my shoulder. I didn't want to move. I would lie there forever if I didn't need to go to the toilet. She woke up when I moved and giggled. I headed to the bathroom. When I returned, she was no longer there. Madison's coffee tasted much better than mine. I decided that from now on she would cook it herself. When I came out, she already had microwave pancakes and 3 scrambled eggs on the table. When I left, she smiled again. The eggs looked like they had suffered a little from being turned over, but only one of the rings was broken. By the end of the first week, everything calmed down. Madison and I had several conversations about what I expected from her. She was smart and learned quickly. Our relations have somewhat normalized. She seemed comfortable with me, and I was thrilled to have her around, especially since we started having sex regularly. There were no more trips to Taco Bell and Waffle House. I still had to eat lunch outside when I worked, but that didn't pose a problem. I asked Madison to cook something for herself every day that I was gone. The first month flew by quickly. My new pet now cooked meals from scratch, not all the time, but quite regularly. She knew how to use a computer and wanted to surprise me with new recipes that she had discovered. Our grocery shopping was getting a little tiresome, and I started making plans for her to get her driver's license so I wouldn't have to accompany her. Madison has never been to the dentist. After I finally figured out how to include her in my health plan at work, she started seeing the dentist regularly. I still had bills to pay, but I could use money from my wife's shopping fund to do that. She needed several $1,000s worth of dental services. Of course, the checks from Mr. Franklin helped. 3 months later, she received her driver's license, and I was relieved of grocery shopping duties. I was in seventh heaven. It's impossible to imagine anything better. And then the bomb fell. Bobby, I think I'm pregnant. Do you know this for sure? Yes, I've been pregnant before. Do you have children? No. I had 2 abortions. Mr. Franklin does not allow children. Mr. Franklin is not here, but I am. I know. Bobby, what do you want from me? For me, it was as easy as shelling pears. I want you to go to the doctor and find out what you need to do so that we have a healthy baby. I expected a smile, but not a hug. She almost knocked me over when she jumped on me. I think she was happier than me. I also didn't expect the negative reaction I received after my first visit to the doctor. The examination clearly showed all the scars and bruises on Madison's body. Although none of them were fresh, The hospital staff felt it their duty to contact the authorities. Then the authorities considered it their duty to talk to me. I wasn't sure what to say. I decided it would be best if I didn't mention Morris Franklin at all. I simply told them that she had been in an abusive relationship before I met her. The doctors confirmed that none of the bruises were fresh, which confirmed my statement. Madison pissed them all off because she flatly refused to say anything. The situation was temporarily resolved when I agreed to bring her back to the hospital for regular visits, and the hospital agreed to report any further incidents of abuse to the police. From then on, everything seemed to go smoothly. Madison and I became closer. She never seemed to mind that I was large and plain. She started cutting my hair, and it looked a little less harsh. I had to comb my hair a little, but I didn't mind. The biggest change was my new beard. Every 3 days, she would sit me down and carefully trim my beard, eyebrows, and ears. I thought only old people needed their ears trimmed. Perhaps I was starting to get old. The beard seemed to soften the features of my face. My unattractive nose and mouth were hidden behind the neat mop of hair that covered my face. I also realized that I started to dress a little better. Her shopping trips included more than just groceries. She seemed to enjoy buying me clothes. Since I could afford it, I didn't complain. A few months before the baby was born, we went to Maryland and got married. Morris never said we couldn't, and besides, he wasn't here. We gave birth to an adorable baby girl whom Madison named Roberta. My parents moved to Florida many years ago, but flew out to see the baby and meet their new daughter-in-law. My mother and father seemed amazed that I had attracted the attention of such a wonderful girl and married her. I never explained the circumstances to them. Madison had no idea who her parents were, so we had no one in her family to contact. A few months later, we bought a house. It was a little bigger, a little nicer, and a little more expensive than renting. I got a good raise at work that year, and that helped. We continued to receive a monthly check from Mr. Franklin. One way or another, he found out our new address. The following year, we had another daughter, Marcella. I was, of course, glad that we purchased a new house. My life was full of meaning and everything was perfect. I had a good job, a comfortable home, a beautiful wife, and 2 charming daughters. What more could a man want? But time flew by too quickly. Madison and I had completely forgotten about Morris Franklin. Although we were reminded of this every month when the check arrived, we seemed to be detached from the reality of its existence until the phone rang. "Mr. Trent, this is Morris Franklin." It was a shock. I knew that one day he would return, but I kept thinking that maybe something would change. That did not happen. "Yes, Mr. Franklin, glad to hear from you." Of course, it was a lie, but I tried to be polite. "Mr. Trent, it's time to settle everything." I returned to the county and temporarily stayed at an executive hotel in the city center. I live in room 11222. I will be waiting for Topaz at 6 o'clock in the evening. I want to say how much I appreciate the fact that you took care of her in my absence, and I will add a small bonus to your next and final check. I said nothing. I couldn't get a word out. I sat in silence. "Mr. George Trent, can you hear me? Can you hear me?" "Yes, I heard you. Room 11222 at the Executive Hotel at 6 o'clock. I'll make sure she's there." Madison stood in the room and heard me ending the call. She stood looking at me and finally spoke. "What did he say, Bobby?" "He said it was time to make things right. I do not know what to do." "What do you want from me?" "We have no choice. It's time to make things right. This must be done." Madison looked at me, and I knew she saw the tears in my eyes. Grown men don't cry. I left the house and walked down the street. I didn't know where I was going, but I just wanted to take a walk. 2 hours later, I returned home. My wife was sitting on the sofa, all dressed up. Roberta and Marcella sat comfortably in front of the TV. She stood up and looked at me without flinching. "I have to go. You must take care of the children. Dinner on the stove. Just warm it up." After she left, I sat on the sofa and cried. The girls didn't notice anything. We had a quiet dinner. Roberta asked where her mom was, and I told her she had to go to a meeting. I had no idea how I would explain tomorrow why she didn't come back. It was a dream. A wonderful dream. I still had my girls, but Madison was gone forever. I had just put the girls to bed when I heard the front door open. It was Madison. She's back. I burst into tears like a child, rushed to her, and picked her up. Take it easy, Bobby. Take it easy. You'll break my ribs. Sorry, I'm so glad to see you. I was afraid that we had lost you forever. Why? Why do you think so? I don't know. I think it's because of your relationship with Mr. Franklin. I felt like I didn't have a chance. Bobby, what was the last thing Morris said to you before he left? I thought for a moment before answering. Mr. Trent is your new master. You will unquestioningly do everything he asks of you. Do you understand me? What did you tell me to do tonight before I left? I told you it was time to make things right. That's exactly what I did. Bobby, that's exactly what I did. Did the girls have dinner? Yes. Fine. No more talking. Let's go to bed. I had a restless night. The next morning, Madison acted as if everything was normal. I was at work when I found out what really happened. The TV in the break room was showing the news. A man identified as Morris Franklin was found murdered in his downtown hotel room this morning. He was tied to the bed with silk ties and a plastic bag was placed over his head. Police were searching for a goth girl who was caught on CCTV going in and out of his room earlier in the evening. That evening, I brought home a dozen roses for my wife. For dinner, we had burritos, not frozen. I'll miss these monthly checks, but I think we can handle it. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.